Thank you for attending today's webinar. I'm Ken Ross. I am a board member of SPSP and also the webinar coordinator. And I appreciate you attending today's webinar. This webinar is the fourth webinar for this year. We will do one again in June, I'm sure. And then we'll go back in the fall and do webinars for the rest of the year. As last year and this year, Sedgwick Brand Protection has sponsored our webinars, and we thank Sedgwick very much for their support. And we're going to talk today about how insurance companies, or at least professionals who work for insurance companies, what they think about product safety in companies that they insure or are thinking of insuring. And I've been involved in the insurance piece of this for many years, and both as an in-house lawyer who was trying to get companies to insure my employer, and also dealing with insurance companies while we were defending product liability litigation. And when I left the company, and was in a law firm, I started training insurance company personnel on the legal aspects of product safety and the effect they have on product liability litigation, and also just general product safety techniques. So I've had lots of experience with underwriters, loss control personnel, claims personnel within the insurance industry, and have come to understand what they do and respect them greatly, because they have tough jobs. They're being asked to evaluate insureds or potential insureds, and if they guess wrong on some of this stuff, it can impact the company, the insurance company, because they're the ones who are responsible for much of or all of the claims and litigation that result from that company's activities. So I thought it'd be interesting to have experienced people who work in loss control for insurance companies talk about their own personal thoughts. They're not here representing their companies at all, and but they do have a lot of good insights, because they're dealing with companies every day who have product safety programs, and evaluating the adequacy of the program or inadequacy of the program, or deficiencies, or how it can be improved, are things that they're thinking about every day. So it'd be kind of interesting to hear from them on their thoughts on things they think work, things that may not work, things that could be done better, red flags that companies can identify to help them figure out whether they really need to do a better job. So, with that in mind, let me introduce our speakers today. Philip Cass is at CNA, and Philip has many years of experience. He's currently a product consulting director at CNA Insurance, and has been involved in risk management, risk control, and all things related to the areas that we're going to talk about today. Karine Narr is from Chubb. Karine is a product liability risk specialist at Chubb, and I've worked a lot with CNA and Chubb over the years, and they're certainly two of the biggest and best companies around for being smart about these areas and knowing who to insure and how to insure. And again, going back to my experience, when I started with insurance companies, it was actually with Tokyo Marine in Japan, which was at that time, I don't know about today, but at that time, the largest liability insurance company in the world. And I was doing lots of seminars and consulting for Japanese companies. So that's how I got started with it, but then had experiences with CNA and Chubb. So between our two speakers, they've got decades of experience in this area, and I look forward to hearing their thoughts on this subject. We won't read these disclaimers, but insurance companies love to have these kinds of things. It's Maybe I had to have my own disclaimer up here. I'm not sure, but I don't have one. So, but these companies do. We won't read them, but I'm sure you'll look at those later to see what they say. So this is our agenda today. We're going to talk about liability insurance and what it covers and what it doesn't cover. Just very briefly to remind everybody, so we're on the same page, what theories of recovery they have, and tie that together with what's then also covered under the general liability policy. And then we'll get to the guts of it, and that is, okay, so what do you do about it? You've got insurance, you've got potential risk, both you and the insurance company. What are good things to do to try to minimize or avoid risk altogether? That's what we'll be talking about today. So I will be monitoring questions that come in during the session. It's possible I would respond directly to a question just to the person who raised the question if it's just a very narrow question, and those that will pose to the entire group I'll save till the end. So submit your questions as they come up in your mind, and I can hold on to them and we'll answer them later, or I'll respond during the program. Okay, so let's get started. If I can, of course, I pressed the button there and oops, it's not too far here. All righty, so let's talk about commercial general liability policies, and I'm going to turn it over to Phil.
Great, thanks, Ken, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Appreciate you joining. Ken has the slides for us to address this information, and I have, gosh, over 30 years experience, 3 different companies, and I can probably talk to you until you're ready to clock out and go home at the end of the day. But to start off with, working on the commercial general liability policy, as risk control, loss control, risk engineering, whatever your insuring company calls that department, we look at the policy from the standpoint of pretty simple, what's going to cause bodily injury or property damage. Or if I'm working with a trainee, I usually say to them, is the product going to kill, maim, or burn down the building? So that's what I look for, and that's the whole, how is the product or the service going to cause the bodily injury or property damage? And property damage, typically you're looking at fire, I think, is the most common thought that people have is, okay, how is it going to burn down the building? But Ken asked me to ask us to give examples. If we can provide any, we can't provide any company names or anything, but one of the things we see in property damage these days that the industry is paying claims in is water damage. The building's not burning down, it's a washing machine hose breaking or a valve breaking and causing flood. And it might just be a residential home, not that big of a deal, but think about if the installation was in a multi-story condominium and there are 100 of these valves and half of them fail. And so we have water damage. And then, so that's what we're looking at. And when I visit a client, part of what we're doing is gathering information for underwriting, because there's 3 main groups that we work with in the insurance industry. Our own group, the risk control, loss control, supports underwriting, and underwriting is the decision maker. They're the leader. And then if there is a loss, then we have the claims department jump in it. And we're all very separate in what we do, but we support each other. So if I'm on a call at a client and the client asks me a coverage issue, I'm not going to be able to answer that, because that is the role of the underwriter and the agent. So and I'll direct you back to those 2 entities. Also, if you want to pose the what if scenarios, well, what if this breaks or this happens? Are we covered? That's going to be a combination of claims and underwriting. And as we say, there's going to be a lot of, it depends. It depends on what policy you have and what exclusions, which brings me to what's not covered by the commercial general liability policy. Again, it depends. It depends on your policy. The items here that we see at the bottom. So is recall covered? You may or may not have coverage for that, but it may be a separate addendum to your policy. The errors and omission, that's your professional liability. You may or may not have that coverage in there, probably a separate policy. Inadequate work, that's someone say a painter, it does a paint job, and is it covered if you said you wanted shiny paint and they do a satin and you wanted a gloss or a semi-gloss? That doesn't, there's no property damage or bodily injury. You're just unhappy with the work. Same thing with the negligent actions. That really depends on what your exclusions are. So you may see pollution. If there's a dumping of some chemical, do we have coverage for that? That's where you're gonna go to your agent and you're gonna say, hey, it's just covered, the what if scenarios. You wanna look at that. I think one you might think about today is data. You provide your data to an entity, your company provides it to another company, they manipulate the data, and then it becomes corrupted or they lose the data. Okay, so the data isn't a physical product you can pick up. There's no bodily injury or property damage, but the data is corrupted or lost. So those are the kind of things that you'd want to discuss with your agent and make sure that you're understanding where your coverage ends and begins. So I definitely take a look at the exclusions. Let's see what else we have. The discontinued products. If you're a company that's buying other companies or merging, what are you picking up in terms of that merger, that acquisition? Are you just picking up the assets, or are you picking up assets and liabilities? So it depends. So in terms of insurance, in my years of experience, you want to be involved. You want to be involved with your agent, your company, whatever company is insuring you. And if you don't have the legal background, I have to give a couple shout outs to Ken throughout this presentation, is get legal counsel, because the insurance policy is a contract. There's terms and conditions. So you want to understand it. If you don't, you have your agent, and maybe you need legal counsel for the various scenarios you're considering. And just from our standpoint of we're out there, we're visiting, I would impress upon you to make sure you take the time to convey to us all the things we're going to address in this seminar. Sometimes we'll get meetings set up and companies will say, well, we only have an hour of time. Is it really enough time to tell me how great your company is, what you do, and why we want to insure you, and to ask all the questions? And you think about your facility, we're wanting to take a walk through and see your quality control, you see your raw materials areas. You have 80,000 square feet or 180,000 square feet, an hour is not going to be enough time. So I would say ask for more time and use that time to show us, the insurance companies, why you're so great. And I would say, Ken asked me to, or ask us to tell any deal breakers. We in risk engineering, loss control we don't make the decision if it's a deal breaker or not, but we might raise an eyebrow at something. I would say comments to avoid might be, that's why I buy insurance. If you make that comment, I will probably think, oh, that's not what we want to hear. Or if it's specific to a product, I ask a question, well, how do you address this issue? And you throw your hands up and go, well, that's the customer's problem. So those two, I would say, are the not deal breakers, but raise an eyebrow at that. Karine, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. You know, again, that third-party bodily injury and property damage, when we're looking at a company and their products, we're constantly trying to figure out, like, how could someone get injured using this product? How could this product injure somebody else or cause property damage? So it's that third-party aspect.
Good.
Let me jump in and just ask a question here, because it relates to what you just were talking about, just so everybody understands. Let's say you do your work during the underwriting process, the company insures you. And I met Philip, I met you because you came before we got the insurance. Now, and I know your name and I know your phone number. And let's say now I want to set up a better safety program in the company. Can I call you and get advice on how to set up a safety program, or is that outside the parameters of what you're allowed to do or have time to do?
So, I would say it depends. I mean, we cannot offer legal advice or anything along those lines, but you know, we do have kind of the framework of what a good product safety program looks like. What are some of the key elements of it? And we do have, you know, the ability to kind of ask you some questions about what you are doing, and guide you, you know, based on what we see best in practice within the industry. And again, it's going to vary depending on what industry you're in, what your product is. But yes, we can be a resource for those types of things.
And Philip, isn't it true that after the insurance is let, you guys go out periodically to a company and evaluate the current status of their efforts and make suggestions about improvements?
We will visit companies multiple times in a year. We may visit them once every couple of years. If they're asking for help, the insurance reps don't get a whole lot of love. So, you know, if someone invites us out, we're showing up. You invite us out, we'll show up.
Okay, well, that's all right. That's good. That's good to know, because you're also busy and you have so little time to do some of these things that it's nice to know that if we call you, there's a good chance you might come out and help us out, improve ourselves, which is to everyone's benefit. Okay, I think I can move to the next slide. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, there we go. Okay.
All right. This one, we're not going to spend a ton of time because I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, you know, these theories of recoveries, you know, breach of warranty, negligence, and then obviously the strict liability, which, you know, is really getting down to the product being defective. And, you know, as Phil kind of alluded to, when we're going out to meet with a company on a prospective basis, you know, really what we're trying to do is we kind of do our own form of a risk assessment. It's different from what you guys do for your products themselves. We're really looking at your products as a whole and what could go wrong. Again, how is it going to cause third-party bodily injury or property damage? And so we're really, you know, what is the product? Who's using it? How is it being used? And how could it cause those injuries? That's what we as risk engineers, one of the primary functions of what we do is. And so Phil gave an example when he and I were talking yesterday, like, you know, you're manufacturing a doorstop. That's a pretty basic product, probably not too many concerns. But now if you're also manufacturing magnetic releases, they both serve the same function. They keep a door open. But obviously the level of risk with a magnetic release is different because of where it's being used. It's typically being used in, you know, facilities like hospitals where we need to have fire and life safety being maintained. And so the function of those magnetic releases releasing when they're supposed to is critical to the safety of others and minimizing third-party bodily injury claims. So it's things like that where we're really looking at your product, what it is, who's using it, and trying to, within the framework of these theories of recovery, how could we potentially see claims that we as an insurance company would need to pay out on? And so that's really kind of, we keep these three things kind of in our back pocket on when we're evaluating a product. I don't know, Phil, if you had any other comments on this slide?
No, that covered it.
Okay, I'll go to the next slide.
So again, as Ken alluded to earlier, product safety is not the same thing as product liability. We can manufacture a safe product, we can do it correctly, we can follow all the things, but that doesn't mean that somebody isn't going to get injured or our product isn't going to cause damage. So product safety is not equivalent to product liability. And you know, what we're really looking for companies is, as I say, there's kind of 4 buckets. What is a company doing to prevent losses from occurring? How are they set up to respond should those losses occur, which they most likely will, because again, even safe products, people do stupid things with them and get injured using those products. So how are they equipped to respond? And then, you know, defend. How can they, in a court of law, how are they set up to defend themselves and the actions that they took? And then finally, kind of this risk transfer piece. And we'll talk about these all in more detail on the next couple slides, and hopefully give examples of things that companies can do in each of those areas.
Okay, next slide?
Yes.
I think so, yep.
Okay.
So I want to start with the first one, the prevent. So what can you do? Karine mentioned it, doing a product risk assessment. If you haven't done one, you can go online, you can find plenty of information for guidelines. There are companies out there that will do product risk assessments, but that's really when you're designing it. Looking at the product and what's going to cause a injury, and from the risk assessment, you look at what goes into a product and what comes out of it. So what goes into it might be electricity, or you put water in it, or you put a battery in it, and then what comes out of it. And you may be thinking, okay, well, if it's something as simple as a flashlight, you put a battery in it, so light comes out of it. But if it's a more involved product, does it produce something that you're not typically considering? Does it produce noise, or does it produce some type of exhaust that could be toxic? So looking at it from that risk assessment angle, you really want to just evaluate the product and looking at who the end user is, and their ability to use that product. So in the design practice, that's what we want to see. So from an insurance company standpoint, when we're out there and we go through your design area, that's what we're interested in finding out. Tell me how you design the product to prevent bodily injury or property damage, any design features on it. And from the manufacturing standpoint, we'll probably walk by your manufacturing line. We want to see, you know, how are the employees on the manufacturing line involved? Do you ask them, hey, do you have any thoughts on the product? Is there any problems when you're producing it or assembling it that is a concern to you? Are you cutting your finger? You see somebody's wearing gloves and you're thinking, why are they wearing gloves? That's not a process that typically would use gloves. And then they tell you, oh, well, this panel has sharp edges. Well, if it has a sharp edge and it's exposure to your employee, then if someone has to service that product or open it up, now you have a laceration exposure to the end user. So getting them involved and just asking them. And you might get the middle schooler response initially of, no, it's fine. But look around at their workstation. If you're making a product that's all metal and you see a claw hammer, well, you should immediately think, why is there a claw hammer? We're a metal shop. Claw hammers are for woodworking. I don't get it. And maybe they tell you, oh, we use that to hold something when we assemble it. So you could easily find some potential improvement opportunities just by talking with your manufacturing staff. Quality control, really, what are we doing there? We're looking at the product. We should be looking at raw materials coming in, component parts, assemblies, and then finished product. How are we improving the product? Are there supplier concerns? Those are the items we're looking for in the quality control department. Because a lot of times we will do our walkthrough and we'll walk into the quality department and they'll go, what are your questions? And we're going to usually ask, well, tell me about your quality control process. I want to know raw materials, in process, finished product, and even down to what's the quality control of the shipping container, how it's packaged to make sure the product isn't damaged in transit. And then the other portion, the manuals and warning labels. We'd love to get into that because we can look at that usually before we even show up at your site. If you have your manuals online, I will immediately go to your documents portion of your website and I'm looking through your manuals because my expectation is you're going to have all the safety warnings at the beginning. If you don't, now I'm gonna do a raise an eyebrow at that. Why are there not any? And then I'm looking through the manual. Is it clear? And then when I'm on your site, I'm going to ask, do you export? If your manual is only in one language and you're exporting to countries using different languages, what are we doing there in terms of translation and making sure the terminology is correct and it's been evaluated? Warning labels, yeah, danger warning, caution notice. What do you have in the manual, in your quick start guides, in your user guides, user manuals, what's on the product itself? And we'll be looking at it even from the standpoint of, is the product used outside? Is this label going to fade and wear out? So how you address those issues. And a kin deal breaker. I'll say a raise an eyebrow. If I see MSDS on your site, I'm gonna think, okay, what's the revision date of that? Because it should be the safety data sheet instead of the old material safety data sheet. That's an indicator to me that this might be an opportunity to revise and update some of your content. And then look at the product from the standpoint of who's the end user, vulnerable population. So elderly who may have poor eyesight, is the print really fine and hard to read? Or is it children who may not read or may not bother to read? So I'd look at that, those angles, and then also contemplating, do you refurbish or rebuild any equipment, and how do you update safety, the warning labels, the manuals, software upgrades there. So what are you doing and making sure that you're documenting all these areas? Yes.
Philip, do you ever get involved in these issues as it relates to the components your insured or potential insured buys? You know, so are you going to look at the warning labels of the components that go into the product that you're insuring?
So the answer is yes, and it depends on the product or the component part. So an assembly may be, say it's a light source for a laser. Well, that's probably going to have some warning labels on it. If it's a fastener or a washer, there's most likely no warning label on there. But one of the great things today is with the QR codes. So even if you want to put a warning label on a product that's really small and you can't physically put it on there, or the label becomes so small that you can't read it, but you can at least get a QR code on there or on the packaging that can then link the user to your website where you can explain it. Any concerns there? Karine, did you have any?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a couple of things that I would add. So, when I'm kind of looking at a company's ability in all of these areas, like when we talk about design practices, I'm typically asking the engineers or whoever I'm meeting with, like, how many new product development projects are we working on a year? And then I'm asking, the follow-up question is, well, how many of these actually make it all the way through to a production stage where we're actually producing the product? And, a red flag for me is if 100% of my projects are making their way through the design process. Because typically, if we're doing our due diligence, there will be some things that get kicked out. Either there's no market for it, or we found out we can't source the parts we need. That there's going to be something that's going to kick a project out so that it doesn't make it all the way to the production level. So I'm always looking at those types of things, and are my stop gates really stopping things and deflecting things that maybe we don't want to move forward. In terms of quality control, again, just really looking at what you guys are doing from the suppliers, qualification, and those types of things. And then when it comes to warnings and labels, one of my red flags is if I see inconsistencies in terms of how we're handling those warnings and labels. It's on the product itself, my sticker says caution, but in my manual, I have it at a warning level. So which risk assessment is correct? So I'm looking for those inconsistencies that can crop up in little things. And I know in the ideal world, everybody's manuals are reviewed on an annual basis, and we're doing all these things, and it doesn't always happen. But what I'm doing is looking for some inconsistencies and things that, again, could prevent or put forward a means for someone to, say that you were negligent in your duty to warn, and that's what caused said injury or property damage. So we're trying to protect you guys as much as possible. And the other thing that I look at from a design standpoint is what industry standards are available, what regulations are applicable, and are you as a company, are you aware of those? Are you networked into them? Are you following those current best practices and standards?
Good.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay.
Yes.
If it works.
Did it freeze up on you?
No, there we go. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So now that we've talked about, what a company can do to kind of prevent claims from happening, we all know that they still will happen. Someone will file a claim against you for some kind of damages. And so how are you as an organization set up to respond to those events? Do we have warranties that we're providing, and are we monitoring our warranty rates? I mean, are we keeping track of what are the warranty complaints we're getting, and if there's any trends or commonalities in those things? Are we going back and maybe making some design changes or retrofitting something or updating a warning or a manual based on kind of the feedback we're getting from our customers? Because that's what a warranty complaint is. It's feedback directly to you on how your product is working and how, if people are using it the way you anticipated they would. And that gets to that market surveillance as well. I can't reiterate enough with social media right now. if you don't have a means to kind of keep your eye on what's going on with social media, you're behind the 8 ball. You need to be monitoring what is being posted about your product, what statements people are making. If your product becomes one of these new fad things like, office chairs. At one point, there was a big thing where you were having office chair races and pushing them down a hill. Well, that's not how an office chair was intended to be used. And if you weren't aware of that, you couldn't make any disclaimers or issue warning statements about not using your product in that manner. The same for customer complaints. Having a process and a procedure in place on how you're going to manage those complaints that come in. Sometimes some companies, depending on their product, they need to have dialogues that their customer complaint people follow. Because we can't, if it's a medical device, we can't offer medical advice because we're not medical people, but you may need to respond to some things. If it's a consumer product, maybe you're walking them through on how to use the product. But again, your staff need to be trained on how to adequately handle those customer complaints that might come in. And then finally, having recall procedures in place. Being able to, if we find out that there's a problem with our product and it's causing injuries that we hadn't anticipated, we have to have a means and a procedure in place to get those products back and off the marketplace or repaired or retrofitted so that we do not continue to see those types of injuries occurring. So having recall procedures in place, knowing who is going to do what, how we're going to communicate, how we're going to get products back, whether they be destroyed, and then again, doing mock recalls to test your system. And mock recalls, there can be 2 levels of them. Some of them are just traceability, like do I have the ability to trace back to my raw material suppliers? And can I trace forward to where my product went? And those are just simple tracing, like you identify it. And then versus an actual mock recall where we go to the extent of issuing notifications to our distributors or things along those lines and doing a more detailed recall. But again, having all of these things in place and being ready to respond if or when things go wrong is really important. If we don't have those things in place, the chances of us making a mistake during this process increases. And we really don't want to do that at this point. So these are some of the things that we, as risk engineers for the insurance company, we're looking at how you guys are set up to handle that. Phil, I don't know if you had any more comments.
No, I think you hit on all the items that I would address in that market surveillance with the internet misuse of your product, having a response on your website, not condoning the use, get legal counsel on how to word it, how to get that out there. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Kim, would you go on to the next slide then?
Well, before you go, let me ask a question, which is always of interest to me on the recall procedures. And I think different insurance companies have different thoughts on it, and sure, even within a company. I mean, do you guys have form? Well, let's say you're going to insure me and I want to set up a recall program. Do you have forms you can give me of things that you would like me to think about and consider when I'm setting up my program? Because there's so many different ways. You've got recall policies, procedures, you got product safety committees. Some companies and some industries do mock recalls. Do you require mock recalls? And if so, how do you do it? Do you have various forms and examples of things that you can provide to help a company set up some of these things that you want them to do? I do.
I was thinking, ladies first.
I don't know that we necessarily have forms. We certainly don't have anything that's branded under Chubb. We do have resources and kind of talking points, but again, recall is very specific to each company. So we don't have generic forms that we would provide at this point. I don't know if CNA does, Phil.
It'd be the same for us. Yeah, there's it depends on the product line. You know, some companies may make 6 products a year because it's industrial equipment. So the recall procedures for that is completely different from retail ready, where hundreds of thousands of products are being sold. So.
Well, and I'll just put in a plug for SPSP. 1, we're trying to do webinars on all of these topics you're talking about today, and 2, trying to identify information that we can post now or later, which will give you some examples of procedures that in all these different areas. So I'll go to the next, oops, just a second here. There we go. All right.
All right, thank you, Ken, appreciate that. So documentation, the classic line you hear from OSHA, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. So same thing with the product liability, with all aspects of your program. Document everything, and we'll start with the design decision. So if you make a design change, a revision, a new model, documenting the reasoning behind it. Was there a change because of material, or is it prompted because of customer complaints or a loss? But documenting that. The other thing that comes up a lot with clients when we see safety features that are optional, and there's a couple concerns. There is the safety feature may be optional because it's for a specific application. So if you're designing a fan for a residential use, you probably don't need an explosion-proof motor. But if it's used in an industrial application, maybe that is an option. And if it's considered a safety option, you need to clarify, document the use or the application of that safety feature. So if you do have the optional safety feature, make sure you're documenting why, the application, why it's optional, because it's for a specific application. If there's a loss involving your product and you just have a guard that's optional that some clients don't want to pay for, that could be used against you. You know, talk to your attorney, talk to Ken about it, and say, you know, hey, what do you think about making this guard optional? And you know, and see what would, you know, and go back to the risk assessment. Look at the product and say, okay, if we deliver this product without the safety feature, what are the ramifications of that? The quality control, that's okay. So you've identified a problem that's documented. What did you do to fix that problem? Or if it's not maybe a problem or just a concern, you decide to improve your product, are you documenting how you improved it, what changed, how did you follow up with owners of your product that are already in the marketplace? I would say juries want to know that you care. So you found maybe an area you could improve your product. Document that. You're contacting your existing customers and saying, hey, this is a new option. You know, showing that your company cares, because you don't want to be painted as the evil company that made this feature an option, or they upgraded it for if you buy a new one, but if you have the old one, too bad. Installation, a great item to look at from the documentation standpoint. If you're providing installation of your product, you could even put this on if you're a service provider. First, you're going to have your before and after photos is what we would suggest. And I would say making sure we're documenting when you show up, you're documenting the condition of the site for the installation. You're looking at what is available, the work area for the employees. Are there missing safety features? Is there open electrical panel, a fall hazard, something along those lines, and documenting that. And can we stop? Is there a point where your employee who's doing the install of your product says, wait a second, this is not the correct installation. This is we have a safety issue here that creates a hazard once your product's installed, that the employees at that location can be exposed to a hazard that wasn't contemplated originally. So they should be able to stop the installation, call in, say, okay, what are we doing? How can we make this better? And then if they're in the middle of an install and something has to be changed or moved, that you're documenting any changes. So basically document when you get there, what's the condition of the site. If it's a multi-day install, here's how we blocked off the area. Here's how we left at the end of day one. Here's what we did day two. Here's how we blocked it off day two, day three, and so on until it's done. And here's the final site. Take different angles, make sure there's good lighting. We see installations where everything went fine, and then somebody slipped and fell, and they claimed it was we spilled water, or there was oil dropped, or there was a box that somebody tripped over. But if you have that documentation, if this is the site when we left it, and we have the customer sign off that everything was clear and okay, that's what you want to be able to have. In terms of the training, oh gosh, 3 areas.
Can I interrupt, Phil?
Sure.
Remember, these are consumer product companies, so on the call. So we're not going to be training employees in an installation, yes, but not in a consumer product setting. So before you spend much time on that.
Okay, good. So training then for retail, the biggest thing would be your call center. Okay, I get your product and I'm ready to install it and use it in my house, use it in my home or workplace, wherever, out at the park. But I can't get it to work. I call the call center. What training do they have in terms of documentation of we're consistently getting calls every day. People don't understand how to connect the battery or how to attach the handlebars. So I'd say for retail, jump over the authorized installers, employees, and go right to your call center. And what training do we have there? What documentation would follow up? Customer complaints, similar thing. How are we documenting that? And are we keeping it? Are we saving that information? Are we trending it? Or are we just not tracking it or deleting it at the end of the week, end of the month? And then if there's complaints, what's in the market and how can we change that? Does it require a software update? And then from all of this, from the documentation standpoint, and Ken, maybe you can expand on this a little bit, is who's going to testify in court? So we documented all of this, and there's a loss, your product's being blamed. Are we going to bring in the engineer who, when questioned, could we have done this better? The engineer is very analytical. They might say, well, yeah, we probably could have done it. Is that going to bode well in court? So yes, Ken, any thoughts on who should we bring in?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add one thing on that, the design decisions. Again, you guys are doing your risk assessments. And I think the important thing is that you have to have a rationale for why you make the decisions that you make. When we make a decision, we assume it's the right decision. We may find out in the future that it's not, but if we have a clear rationale for why we made the decision that we made, and there's something to back up that decision, that's going to hold up a lot better in court than, we don't have any guidelines. We just make decisions. So again, kind of defining what your risk assessment process is and how you're making the decisions that you're making, and documenting that. Ken, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, let's in the spirit of time, and we have a few questions, so let's get to the last slide, and then we'll answer a couple of questions here. So let me get to the next slide.
Okay. The final category where you guys as manufacturers kind of have some control is what we call risk transfer. And so this is where you're looking for your partners that are helping you, manufacture your product to share some of this liability exposure with you. So if we're subcontracting out any manufacturing processes, painting, heat treating, assembly or packaging, selecting subcontractors who have good track records, kind of knowing the quality of those subcontractors, and hopefully getting some type of formal contracts in place with them. The same with your suppliers. And then, looking for certificates of insurance. Do these partners that you're working with, do they have product liability insurance that could potentially step in if the defect in question proves to be from, a component part manufacturer's product, not your own? We would like that company to be footing the bill for any potential claims related to that defect. And getting certificates of insurance from your business partners is one way that you can accomplish that. And, again, for us as risk engineers, we don't evaluate the contract specifically. We're basically looking at the mechanisms that your organization has in place to establish contracts with suppliers or subcontractors, to obtain certificates of insurance, to be asked to list as an additional insured. We're looking at the mechanisms that you have in place to do all of those things. When it comes to actually reviewing contracts and terms, again, we would highly encourage you to seek out legal counsel to assist you with those things. But again, risk transfer, just trying to make those parties that are part of the manufacturing process bear their weight in the process. I don't know, Phil, if you had anything to add.
The certificates of insurance, every company I've worked for, that's key. Everyone in risk control, loss control, risk engineering is going to ask you, tell me about your certificate of insurance program, and you can work with your agent on that. Getting the correct limits, depending on what they do. If it's a low hazard item, maybe not as big a concern as if you're dealing with construction. So, Ken? Okay.
Well, let's get to some questions. Before I do that, just real briefly, I do want to mention to everyone that, because I always get to put in the lawyer stuff in here, that a report by the loss control person at an insurance company to the insured, either during the underwriting process or after you're insured, is not subject to attorney-client privilege. It's fully discoverable in litigation. I'd like to tell my loss control friends, be careful how you write that report. Don't put any inflammatory language in there like, I told you a year ago to clean up your warning labels and you still haven't done it. When are you going to do it? That's not real helpful in a discoverable document from the insurance company. So there may be a way to try to claim privilege over some of those reports, but I think it's too cumbersome and probably not going to succeed. So just assume that what you receive from the insurance company, suggestions about improvements that could be made, assume that's discoverable, and be prepared to explain to maybe a jury, but also to the insurance company that you took care of these issues or why it's not necessary to take care of them. whether it's warnings, instructions, your recall procedures, your certificates of insurance, your contracts, or any of those kinds of things.
Right.
You may get helpful suggestions, and you want to show that you responded to that, and that looks good in the file. And then when the loss control person comes out later or asks you further, or they're considering next year's premium, you want to be able to say that I took their suggestions and I did all these things, or here are the few I didn't do. So I just wanted to point that out to make sure you understood about the importance of the loss control reports and how to deal with them, particularly if they're making suggestions for improvement.
Yeah.
A couple of questions here. Distributors. So the distributor of a product, they don't make the product, they're selling it. Any suggestions on how you would, the things you think they need to do, and how in depth do they need to go do to get into the quality and safety and warnings and instructions of the products that they're distributing? Any thoughts on that?
I would say the risk transfer piece is critical for those distributors, particularly if they are receiving materials from overseas, because many times if we don't have good risk transfer in place, and sometimes even if we do, the distributor is still considered the manufacturer. So if we don't have recourse against the actual manufacturer, the distributor is going to stand in its stead. So that risk transfer piece and having formal mechanisms related to that would be key.
Yes.
Anything?
And if you're directly importing it, your import broker probably doesn't have any insurance that's going to provide product liability insurance for whatever that person is bringing in for you. So we would, in the industry, look at you as the manufacturer if you're directly importing. So definitely a conversation with your agent. How do we deal with this?
Okay. Additional insureds, vendors endorsements. Any thought on, and I think the question is, I'm asking somebody to name me as an additional insured under the policy, actually I'm transferring risk to them. Thoughts on how to do that, or the importance of doing that, or the effectiveness of doing that?
So a coverage question, which we like to refer you to your agent, and it's not a dismissive response. It's the agent is the expert in that area. So any of those types of coverage questions, you want to be able to explain exactly what the vendor or the seller of your product is, and whose terms are being used. Is it their terms or your terms in terms of your sales, or your sales document or contract or purchase order?
Yeah, and I would say, generally speaking, the benefit of being able to be listed as an additional insured, it allows that some of your defense costs may go to that other company. Having additional insured status on somebody else's policy means that their policy should respond first and would hopefully cover some defense costs that might be associated with that. Again, that's generally speaking. All of these things are specific contracts, and so how they're written and how they're handled is different in each situation. So,
okay. Last question. I make a safer product. I have new safety features in my product. Any suggestions on informing prior customers about these safety improvements?
Do it.
I have thoughts as a lawyer. I've written a whole article on the subject, but that's, go ahead. You're the speakers.
Oh no, I would like to see the article. Let's that almost along the lines of the recall. How are you able to track them? Can you? And if you're selling your product through the internet and your product's being distributed, you have no idea where it is. yeah, the customer registering, what do companies get? 20, 30% on a good day? That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, why don't I do this? I'll post the article on that subject, which is 3,000 words. You can get a lot more information for the attendee who asked that question. It's a longer conversation than we have time for today.
Right.
Yeah.
So why don't, just a second here, let me, I'll just remind people, we've got a webinar scheduled for June 20 on international issues. And if you followed it, there's a lot going on that you need to know about. So we look forward to that. Again, we want to thank Sedgwick Brand Protection for their sponsorship. I want to thank Philip and Karine for participating today. We will post these slides on the SPSP website, and we'll post a few other things that I can come up with that relate to some of the subjects we talked about today. And thank you all for attending. We appreciate it. And we hope you have a nice day and a nice week. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thanks for organizing, Ken.
You're welcome. Thanks.